This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
And I do have a dangerous love of process sometimes. I actually spent a while working in warehouses. I've driven a forklift. I have worked managing a UPS distribution center. I've been around.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. This interview is part of the Career Curious series. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Scott Richards, Director of Training at Virtuous, a nonprofit CRM and marketing platform. Hello, Scott. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Glad to be here.
So for those in the audience that aren't familiar, Virtuous is a donor database, and it's got that kind of baked-in goodness that I'm hoping the field of nonprofit fundraising comes to expect and demand with regularity. So watch out, Scott, we're coming. But before we talk about the fundraising, research, and software stuff, I'm wondering if you would be willing to give us the rundown on your career. However you want to do that. I'm just really curious how you got into being a trainer with a fundraising donor management software.
Sure. Well, and I wish I could say it was a linear path that I laid out at 10 years old as a plan in a composition book. Unfortunately, it's not. So I took a really roundabout way. So I actually have a college degree in music theater. And I was a professional actor, member of Actors Equity, doing the whole thing, starving in New York. I did it in Chicago and in New York City. And for survival jobs in between, I didn't wait tables. Instead, I kept working at nonprofit organizations. And so I was a telefundraiser. I worked helping out with events. I did that for a couple of different off-Broadway theaters and larger houses in New York. That just seemed to be my thing in terms of how to pay the rent in between gigs. Then at the same time, I had other survival jobs. So I worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time. I also worked in retail, and I worked for the Container Store because I'm obsessive and I like organizing things. And over time there, I actually became a trainer at the Container Store. And that was the first place where I started to get into training. And there, they have a really great structure for their training program. They have some folks that are designing these learning modules for how to do soft skills training for people on the team and how to train on some of the proprietary software they use. And I loved it. I just got into it, and I got so excited when I could figure out a way to explain a concept to someone who was struggling and to see the light bulb go off. That light bulb moment I got really into. And then I found out that there was a software company, Wealth Engine, that was potentially going to be looking for some trainers. And so I went and applied, and I started working in customer support there, and I worked as a trainer. And in my time there, I moved all around. I actually worked on the sales team. I did a little bit of everything there because I get bored easily. If you can't tell, I move around. And there, it was great because while I had worked for a few different nonprofits and I had some level of exposure to them, I got exposed to so many more and really got a chance to get to know some of those clients better and to understand their pain better. And I had a great time there. And then I found out about Virtuous. I found out about that through a colleague. My wife and I had been looking to move and make a change. And we hadn't planned to move to Phoenix, Arizona, but there was this little startup called Virtuous that was in Phoenix, Arizona. And they were looking for someone who could do a lot of things, who could do support, who could do training, who could do all these things. And I said, well, I can do a lot of things, and I like to do a lot of things. And so I joined, and in the very early days, it was a very small team of us. And so I did everything from support to training to migrating data to onboarding clients and everything in between. And now as we've grown, it's been great. So I can start to really focus more on training. We've built up our team. But I've also, along the way, had a hand in the product and how we develop Virtuous. And to me, it was so exciting to get an opportunity to, A, continue to train and have those light bulb moments for people, to work with nonprofits, which I've been doing for years now, and also to help build a product that I thought we really needed. And that to me has been, I've learned a lot as I've done it, which has been great about technology and everything else. But to be able to have a hand in helping to shape Virtuous and make it something that I really think the nonprofit space needs has been absolutely exciting. And so, again, not a very linear path that I moved through, but along the way, as I've moved through, I've continued to kind of use the same skills over and over again. So as a trainer, I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of presenting. I stand up in front of a lot of rooms, and all those same things that I learned when I was an actor in terms of how to speak to an audience, I still use those. Now I still use things that I learned about training from back when I was training folks in retail, and I still use some of those same things now. So I suppose it's all led me to this point, but I wish I could say it was planned.
Well, I'm so glad it wasn't planned, because how would anyone plan to have that variety of skill set to go in and bring to a startup? I mean, that's great. It's wonderful. And I'm wondering, so you said something that caught my interest, and I was kind of channeling all the Association for Talent Development meetings I've been sitting in, where you mentioned that you were able to help shape the product. And of course, on the training end, when you're in a big place or big corporate environment, typically they create the software and change it. And then they say, and you go train people. And you're sitting there like, oh my gosh, if they had just asked me, I could have told them they need a bubble to tell people what to do here. Or they shouldn't have made it 3 clicks deep. It should be 1 click. Like, is that the kind of input you had? If you could share a little bit about it.
Yes and no. So I do actually have a seat with our product team. And some of that goes from how we develop new features, what new features we think are needed in terms of looking at our roadmap and what we need to build. One of the things about Virtuous that's a little bit different is we move pretty quickly. So if you like innovation, it's a good thing, because we release updates to our product every 4 weeks. So every 4 weeks, we push out new features and we have updates and things like that. And as we do that too, we have a lot of clients who, it's a great thing. They like us and they love the product and they want to make it better. And so we get feedback from users all the time who say, hey, I love Virtuous. I wish it did X. Hey, this is great, but it would be so much easier, like you said, if instead of 3 clicks, I could do this in 1 click here. And so one of the things I actually spend a lot of time doing is going through all that feedback and sitting with our product team and saying, okay, how do we incorporate some of this into what we're building? How do we balance that with the things that we know we need to build that no one has asked for because they didn't realize they needed them yet, right? All of those things. I have a hand in a lot of that. And the nice thing too is because I'm involved in that process, like you said, I'm not building training for something after the fact. Because I get to stay plugged in to the process, I'm able to assess what we're going to need for training resources, support resources, and everything else as we're pushing out all these updates. And with the speed that we work at, frankly, it's kind of necessary.
Wow. So that's a dream position to be in, but it's also very time consuming, I would bet. You have to go through the feedback, then you're sitting in those meetings. How do you have time to create the content and then update all the videos you did because there's changes? Like, how's that work?
Well, mostly I just avoid sleep. And if you do that, you'd be surprised how much time you can get back in your day. No, especially in the first year or two, we were nonprofit mode. And so you're working some long days and you're doing all of that. As we've gone on, some of it has been, as you grow as an organization, right? You add staff, you add people to the team, you're able to delegate certain things. But the bigger thing has been trying to figure out, okay, what's the most efficient way to channel all this? What's the most efficient way to collect all this feedback? What's the most efficient way to make sure that we're tracking these things? And so it's really been about developing some internal systems that we can use to make that as efficient as it can be. And I will not say that I have a great plan yet for how to get all those things done. It's a challenge every week, but it's a challenge I like because I never have a day where I look up at the clock and say, oh my gosh, is it only 1:30 in the afternoon? More often I look up and say, how did it become 4:30 in the afternoon? And to me, that's exciting. I'd rather have those days than a day where I'm watching the clock and wondering, what should I do now?
So it sounds like not only are you providing training where you're creating training, presenting training on the product, but you're also an important skill for you is process and procedure, logistics, as it were.
It is. And while we haven't gotten into it, I do have some other things in my toolbox from my varied history. I actually spent a while working in warehouses. I've driven a forklift. I have worked managing a UPS distribution center. I mean, I've been around. And so their process and structure and logistics are super important, right? In order to just get through your day. I think I've always carried a little bit of that with me. And I do have a dangerous love of process sometimes. And I think that your audience can probably relate to that too, where you fall in love with optimizing your process to the point where you've lost sight of why that process exists in the first place. But it's perfect. It's a beautiful thing, but you forget why you've been polishing that for a long time. I can do the same thing. Sometimes that's hard for me to step back and say, okay, what's the big picture here? And that's something I have to push myself to do.
So what's the business problem that this process is supposed to solve?
Mm-hmm. Why am I doing this in the first place? What's the why? I always have to remember that.
We have that same issue with prospect research. We get asked to do many things and this process gets put in place and we have templates, and people they never fit into templates properly. So when we stop communicating and stop evaluating that question every single time we get asked for research, we start to prepare things that aren't as useful. It's kind of amazing.
Right. That 8-page narrative report on someone's holdings and their business expertise and everything else is wonderful if it helps secure that major gift. But sometimes you can just really enjoy digging through sources and creating that profile in that report. It's the same thing. It's the same problem. And I have that, in my sort of DNA. I'll get the same way about things where I have to stop and say, okay, and I'll say, so right now I'm working on training videos and I'm editing those videos. And each of the videos has a little tag at the beginning and end, kind of like this podcast, a little music, a little title. And I needed to change up the title, the branding a little bit. Now this lasts for about 10 seconds in a training video. I was an hour and a half in to making some adjustments because I thought, well, what if I animated this here? What if this did this here? And again, you get into polishing this thing. And then I said, this is 10 seconds that most people are going to skip through. I need to pull myself back and stop. It's good.
I am so with you on that. I find that all the time. There's certain things we love to do, but they're not always the things that need to be done first or done so deeply. That's a hard choice.
It is. But I am a believer in what I call productive procrastination. And this is something that, again, I kind of grabbed from the world of retail. In that scenario, if you're working in a store and you've just had 3 different frustrating experiences in a row, someone yelled at you in the store about something or other, an order went wrong, whatever else, you could just do nothing, right? And that doesn't benefit anybody and it doesn't really help you. You kind of stew on it. Or you can say, you know what, I'm just going to go do some straightening up of some shelves and dusting off and cleaning things, which it needs to happen. It's fairly productive. It's not the top of my priority list, but it lets me stop thinking about whatever else is bothering me. It's productive procrastination. The same thing as, you know what, I'm going to go through my email and clean out my inbox. I don't do that every day. I don't want to do it, but at least doing that a little bit can help free up my brain a little bit, jog me out of it. I don't feel like I just wasted an hour on Pinterest. Instead, I've gotten something accomplished that I can say I did something today. It's way more helpful than sort of skimming blogs.
Oh, I love that. Productive procrastination. New phrase. Well, before I let you go, I'm wondering if you have any tips or resources for people who might be looking to flip employment. So maybe they are thinking about going from nonprofit to vendor. There's a lot of startups out there, and prospect researchers have great transferable skills. Maybe they're looking to go to a startup. Do you have any tips?
I have a few that I can impart. So first off, you have to go out and seek some of those resources. So you mentioned the Association for Talent Development. I've gone to them. They've been great in terms of, adding to my toolbox in terms of training. Because again, I don't have a degree in this. I have a degree in doing tap dance, but it's been helpful. The other thing is you need to get outside of your bubble as much as you can. I've seen folks who have worked at one or two, nonprofits. They've had some very similar roles and they're expert at those roles. But you need to get exposed to other types of nonprofits, other types of organizations entirely. If you've been working at higher ed institutions for the last 7 or 8 years, you need to understand how some social service organizations and healthcare organizations function. What's their model and how do they do that? And the best ways you can do that are at conferences, AFP, APRA, those are both great, and just talking to people. The other thing is social media. I'm not as big a fan of LinkedIn, although I do have some folks that I'm connected to on LinkedIn and that I follow. I'm a little bit more active on Twitter in terms of engaging with folks across the nonprofit sphere. And it's a great way to get exposed to other ideas and other thoughts and everything else. That's another form of productive procrastination. Spending some time on Twitter and really cultivating a list of people that you want to follow and that you want to connect with can really help get you outside that bubble and understand the wider world beyond the experiences that you might have. All of that's going to help you if you want to move to the other side of things. And the other thing is just be open to new things and be willing to embrace new things and try new things. I'm a big fan. I work with a lot of people who they might not be great at something. I'm not great at a lot of things, but I'll try it, and I think that's always the big thing is, hey, am I willing to learn? Am I willing to grow? Am I willing to try those new things?
One last question. I'm just curious, there's a great tips. And how did you find the job at Virtuous? Was that an advertisement for the job that you responded to, or did someone tell you about it?
I found out about it through a connection on LinkedIn. So look at that. Way to bring that around full circle.
Sweet.
Yeah. So someone who I had worked with previously, who had connected with Virtuous, and they had put up a note on LinkedIn about looking for someone. And again, I wasn't necessarily looking to move to the desert, but my wife and I were looking to move out of the Washington, D.C. area. That's where Wealth Engine is. And we weren't really sure where we wanted to go. And I said, that sounds interesting. And it's been the best decision I ever made. So I'm really glad I saw that LinkedIn post.
Nice. And if people want to learn more about Virtuous, what should they do? Where should they go?
Well, you can go to virtuouscrm.com. That's our website. From there, you can learn more about Virtuous. You can also learn about responsive fundraising. Virtuous CRM really exists to help nonprofits be more responsive. And responsive fundraising is really just a way of engaging with your supporters in a more one-to-one way, actually listening to the things they tell you and responding in kind, and having an ongoing conversation with your donors as opposed to sending one big blast every December. And you can learn more about that at Virtuous CRM too. You can also learn about responsive fundraising there's actually a book on responsive fundraising that happens to have an audiobook that happens to have a narrator that I happen to know, but that'll also introduce you to more of those concepts of responsive fundraising.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing today. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
That was Scott Richards, Director of Training at Virtuous, a nonprofit CRM and marketing platform. Hopefully, you're now really curious about responsive fundraising. I encourage you to practice some productive procrastination and read the book. I know you'll enjoy it because it's the philosophy behind Virtuous CRM's inclusion of basic analytics features, baked right inside the CRM. And what prospect research professional wouldn't love that? Hey, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come check out the Prospect Research Institute's learning community. It's a membership community with powerful resources, great discussions, and comprehensive courses. Check it out at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I'd love to have you join me as a member of the learning community. See you there.